Hi everybody, welcome. My name's Francesca Esposito and I've been invited here tonight by Oscar, the Ocean Shores Community Association, to chair this meeting tonight and also to lead the North Byron District Activation Community Response Group. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations people, their land upon which we gather, and their elders, past, present and future. Can you hear me okay? We have some special guests here tonight. I'd firstly like to welcome Justine Elliot, our federal member. Thank you for taking time to come out tonight. We also have Deputy Police Commissioner Lanyon, who is leading the whole Northern Rivers Disaster Recovery Coordination. Mal was joining us in person tonight, but he has COVID as of late last night. And Mal's now joining us on video link. Mal, can you hear us okay?
I can, Francesca.
You've got COVID and you're in uniform. Nice.
Just the shirt, I'm sure.
Just the shirt. Thanks, Mal. Hang on, I'll stop talking so we can see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can everyone hear that? Oh, fantastic. Pugh. We also have Kimberley Hone and David Warth, who are both candidates for the upcoming federal elections, Kimberley and David. Also, I'd like to welcome council members that are present here tonight. We have Councillor Alan Hunter, Councillor Mark Swivel and Councillor Asren Pugh, and our Byron Shire Mayor is just walking in, Michael Lyon, thank you. Apologies from Tamara Smith, our state member. She joined our last meeting but has a prior engagement, couldn't make it tonight. Apologies as well from Deputy Mayor Sarah Njai, our General Manager Mark Arnold, Councillor Duncan Day, Councillor Kate Curry and Councillor Peter Westheimer. Their apologies, they were committed elsewhere. Councillor Summer Bolson, I saw you on Zoom, you can't hide, there you are. So another councillor, hi Summer. Apologies from Mandy Nolan, she's also running for the federal elections. She is joining us at 7:30, but she's chairing another meeting from 5 to 7, so she'll join us. I'm sure we'll hear Mandy arrive. We also have Caroline Parker, who is on the board of the North Byron Business Chamber and previous president of the Business Chamber. Caroline, where are you? Hi, Caroline. And we also have Ian Wheels, president of the North Byron Business Chamber, who's present with us tonight. Ian, I lost track of where you are. Ian. Ian's also the general manager of the Country Club. Thank you, Ian, as well, for letting us use this room for free. We have to make sure that we eat and drink, though. Early apologies from Justine Elliot and Michael Lyon and Mark Swivel. They all need to leave between 8 and 8:30 for prior engagements. Jan Mangelson, president of Oscar, should have been here tonight, but she just called me half an hour ago. She's, she thinks she also has COVID. Welcome, community. Can we get a show of hands of who's here for a second time? Who came to the first meeting and came second time? Oh, terrific. Thank you for showing up again. And who's here for the first time? Obviously, everyone else. Thank you. Excellent. Clearly. And welcome to our community who've joined us on video link. We've provided you with a QR code on the meeting chat. If you can please point your phone camera towards the QR code and register for the event. Lots of folks didn't register last time and didn't get the newsletters with all the links with the actions moving forward. We also have a member of the SES here tonight and they'll be stepping us through some advice on how to be better prepared in your household. Where's the SES? Here we go. Hello. Introducing our panel of experts tonight, we have Ziwar Sattouf. He was the guy on the screen last time that we couldn't hear. He's here in the flesh tonight. He's flown up from Sydney this afternoon specifically for this meeting. Ziwar is key to helping our community step forwards for two reasons. Hi, Howie. For two reasons. He is a senior development consultant with a civil engineering background, which means he understands about holding tanks and outlets and rock walls, and he understands what flood mitigation actually looks like. He's also a local resident. I'd also like to introduce you to Robert Crosley. He's president of the New Brighton Village Association. He's also sitting in the middle there, natural resource scientist. He's also crucial to our stepping forwards as a community. He has a deep knowledge of modelling. He understands water and soil, and he also lives in New Brighton. Also, Robyn Bolden is the executive on the New Brighton Village Association on the end there, and Robyn is also a former member of the Byron Council Flood Committee. She also lives in New Brighton and has seen a number of floods come and go, so she has a deep knowledge of the flooding events, and we're lucky to have her on our team. There is myself as well here tonight chairing. So Ziwar, Robyn and myself forming the start of the steering committee, which is still being finalised. It was an action point in our last meeting to form a steering committee. So we are forming the steering committee with technical people. Before we move on, I'd like to just also acknowledge the vast depth of technical expertise that we have in our local area, in our bathtub or in our swamp. It depends which way you see water. We have a spectacular range of specialist skills amongst us. We have very experienced geologists, and I think I saw one sneak in earlier, hydrologists, surveyors, weather experts. These guys are all involved in the conversation with the steering committee behind the scenes. So even though they may not be up here on the front desk, I just wanted to share with you that we're having conversations with these guys behind the scenes, and the level of technical expertise that we have in our own area is stunning. So the community is very well supported. Also, how can we forget Brunswick Heads? Welcome, Brunswick Heads, to our flood family. Oscar is officially now also representing Brunswick Heads as of last week. So before we dive in, can we just have a show of hands of who's from Ocean Shores tonight? And who's from Fern Beach, North Ocean Shores? A few. South Bolden Beach? Oh, excellent. New Brighton? The Pocket? Yelgan? Wooyoung? No, I think the flies reached that far. Is anyone here from Brunswick Heads?
I've got 2 votes.
Oh, fantastic. Anyone from Fancy Pants Byron? A couple, David. The Woodburn class action group. The Woodburn. What's that? Anyone here from Billy Nigel? Have I missed any suburbs? Kingscliff. The Woodburn class action group were going to join us tonight, and they were thinking about following our formula. So is anyone from Woodburn here tonight? Okay. The structure and objective of this meeting tonight, there's 3 parts to this meeting. Firstly, I'm going to update you on our progress from the last 2 weeks since the first meeting. If you didn't manage to join into the last meeting, there's a video recording on YouTube, so it is worth watching. Secondly, we'll hear from our panel of special guests and our council members, our federal member and our federal candidates. The reason why I've asked these special guests along here tonight is because I've asked them to share with us what they're doing for us on behalf of the community, and specifically what actions they're taking for the North Byron community. The third part of the meeting tonight is where we'll hear from the Flood Steering Committee, stepping us through the 24 points in the 2020 Floodplain Management Report, which is this white folder here. This is the second half of the meeting. This is a council report that a consultant has prepared. This folder is the business end of what's going to happen with flood mitigation, and it will form the basis of how funding will be secured in our area. This white folder was finalised in 2020. It's out of date. The basis of the data for this report was using flood data from 2017. We all know that we flooded higher and in more areas in 2022. So the white folder is going to be updated in June, July this year. The council has already engaged a new consultant to calibrate new flood data. There's 24 recommendations so far. By the time the new report's finished, there might be 35, there might be 53, we don't know. But it's important that we understand what the initial 24 recommendations are. The steering committee's put in quite a lot of work the last couple of weeks breaking the folder down. There's 24 recommendations and we've chunked them into 4 categories. We'll be talking about the 4 categories in the second half of the meeting tonight. The reason why we're doing this is because the right folder is where outlets are being talked about, rock walls, tanks, drainage systems. And the white folder also talks about the possibility of buying back houses. So that's why it's important as a community that we understand what this report says and the implications on us as a community. And since the white folder is being updated in June, we figure we really need to understand what it contains now. So the job of the steering committee is to make sure that the right questions are being asked, to make sure that we advocate for the community, to make sure that drainage solutions are implemented where we don't lose our houses, because that is one of the points in the white folder. And it's also the steering committee's job to push for solution studies to be investigated for every possible option that's available before there's any houses that are lost. I'm not saying that houses are going to be lost, but it's one of the options, so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's why we've gone to so much trouble to assemble the best minds in our bathtub, and why we spent so much time reviewing the report, and why we're going to the trouble to discuss and share this with you tonight. So there's a valid reason why we're doing what we're doing. Before we jump in, a bit of housekeeping. I'd just like to ask everyone to keep your questions and input till at the end of every section we have a question and answer section. I ask that you keep your input constructive. We all know that, as I said at the last meeting, council and all levels of government have let us down catastrophically, clearly, because we have a catastrophe on our hands now. We all know that. But the steering committee is focusing on solutions and outcomes and not blaming council or government. So I'm asking everyone tonight to be on board with that and to come along with us positively and constructively. So we ask that we leave the past behind us and we work with council and state and federal government to get the job done. Otherwise, they'll forge ahead, they'll do what they like with no input from community. So let's just make sure that we provide a guiding hand. I know that everybody is hurting, we all are. I personally lost everything, but let's assist by providing our knowledge of the area, our observations of where it floods worst, and ideas of where we want mitigation measures to be put into place. There's a 10-minute break about halfway through the night, just before 8 o'clock. The bar and coffee machine will both be open till 9 o'clock. And now that we're all in here, I think the doors can open now, so we might need to organise somebody to open the doors up. So you can wander to and from the bar throughout the evening as you wish, and the restaurant is open till 7 o'clock. And just a reminder, like last time, that the meeting is being recorded, so please only say what you'd feel comfortable to say publicly in a pub. So please always apply the pub test. We also do need your email address. So if you could please make sure that you click the QR code with your phone camera to make sure that we get your email address so that we can send you action points moving forward. So the first part of the evening is I'd like to share some progress and outcomes so far from the last 2 weeks. Our notice of motion number 19 is getting a subsidy on insurance so that people don't have to be underinsured or uninsured. Insurance subsidies is already being talked about in question time in Parliament. So high levels of government are already talking about this issue. And Kimberley will be talking about that later because she's championing that notice of motion for us on our behalf. Byron Shire Council in the last 2 weeks has also tabled our notices of motion. We're now up to 27 notices of motion. They're going to be discussed at the council meeting on the 2nd of June with promised outcomes by the 22nd of June. So council are listening. Thank you, Councillor Pugh, for moving that motion to table our notices of motion. The state flood inquiry submission is being drafted at the moment. Our noms are going into that and a whole lot more. In fact, the notices of motion are being championed by our federal and state members. I've counted there's a total of 13 of the 27 are now being actioned, so that's not a bad result, I reckon. So our specific requests are being actioned and represented. We've also appeared in the press 4 times: ABC, North Coast Radio, Breakfast Program, ABC News, Common Ground and Echo, and there's 3 more media outlets over the next couple of days doing a story on what we're doing. Basically, we're making a lot of noise in the North Byron district, and we're not being just a squeaky wheel, we're being the squeakiest. More progress. We've made a YouTube film out of the first meeting, which looks more like a professional movie. That's being shared at all levels of government. That was the point of making the movie. So we're not mucking around. We've formed a steering committee, as I've mentioned. We've reviewed the white folder, and we've activated new conversations with the specialists in our area to ensure that we're focusing the best possible advice for our community. We also have Kimberley Hone and David Warth. We had them in our audience at the last meeting. They didn't even tell me that they were sitting in the audience, and they've already been helping in the background, and they've also been helping me with the state flood submission. I've also had lots of help from Justine, Elliot, Tamara Smith and Mandy, Nolan. So we're getting lots of help. That's not bad progress. What do you reckon? Yeah. So the second part of the evening, I'd like to introduce you to our special speakers, starting with Justine Elliot. Justine is championing our NOM number 18, 20 and 24, which is to do with getting us better government payments, getting them more quickly. I'd like to introduce you to Justine Elliot. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Francesca. And can I also acknowledge the traditional landowners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Can I start? I know I've only got 5 minutes, but I do want to acknowledge Francesca and the remarkable work that she has been doing on behalf of your entire community. It is truly incredible. And of course, acknowledge all of you and everyone in this community. It has been not just a challenging time, it's been incredibly traumatic. And in speaking with many of you, we all know someone, if not ourselves, our family, our community, who have been devastated by these floods. And it will be a long time recovering. It will be very difficult, but I think meetings like this are really important. And as Francesca said, in terms of this meeting, her aim was to make it positive. I've been very openly, publicly critical of different levels of government, but I think it's important at meetings like this in terms of, in a sense, using that as lessons learned and how we can do better in the future. And that's what we all want to aim towards. How can we do everything to stop this happening again and not having to be in this situation and meeting like this and having to go through this yet again with all of the trauma that brings. Francesca did ask me to address a couple of specific motions. One of those is motion 24 in terms of government payments. And in terms of those, I've been assisting hundreds of people, particularly in terms of the federal arena, with the Centrelink payment through Services Australia. And if anyone here requires that, please email me. I'm making representations to the Minister's office, speaking to the Minister and their staff constantly about that. Because as you know, there were many people who were ineligible for claims. Some of them didn't have ID because they don't have a house and they don't have any ID. And there were a lot of really difficult circumstances that I was explaining to them about why this person is eligible and should be getting that. And I'm more than happy to advocate for any individuals who might be in that situation, regardless of what it is, just in terms of getting through all of that red tape. It's really frustrating. And in terms of lessons learned from that, what I would like to see is a dedicated Centrelink number that people can go to in times of crisis, and someone they can talk to about their claim and when they're getting their money, and getting that money quickly because they desperately need it, particularly those cash payments. So I think there's some lessons learned and what can be done better into the future. You would know yourselves, if it's not you, people that you know who already are deeply traumatised, have that trauma added to by having to jump through all these hoops and deal with bureaucrats who aren't living here and don't understand, and that's caused immense distress. So if there's anyone here like that, or you know someone, ask them to email or call me, and I will do that for them. I will chase that up for them. I know also from the Services New South Wales perspective, again, some people have had issues with some of those grants. Also, I'm more than happy to chase up some of those if anyone likes, in terms of concerns they're having there, because again, sometimes it's just getting through, and there is a vast number of people, but I want to make sure I can assist everybody who needs to get through and to get that money, whether it's for their household or their business, whatever it might be. So please tell everyone, call me, email me. Couple of the other motions Francesca wanted me to speak about was motion number 18, communications, which of course we had a catastrophic failure of communications during the flood, with almost everybody's NBN gone, people not being able to use their mobile phone, a lot of landlines not working. We all know, because we lived it, how horrific that was. People that needed to be rescued couldn't call 000. People who just couldn't find out what was going on. It was incredibly distressing, and we were all there. We know, and it's really hard to explain that to people who didn't live through it and don't really understand how difficult that was, particularly for those of us that have been here a long time and lived through a lot of floods, and this was really very, very bad. So I think, again, in terms of lessons learned, there's a couple of things. We need to be looking at, and I'm advocating to the federal government in relation to this, in terms of better emergency disaster planning for communications and looking at the options that are there. I mean, one of those issues, of course, is having better communication on wheels as well, the cows. Now, I know obviously there are logistical issues with getting them into areas that have been severely flooded, but at the same time, we need to have a host of them here on the ground that can be used. That was one of the problems as well. Of course, another thing that I am advocating for, many people, as we know, set up their own internet, or got onto Starlink, or were able to do that to access communications. So I'd like to see some sort of strategy in place where there might be some subsidies for people to do that in disaster-prone areas, because we cannot go through this again where people are stranded and cannot get help, where people who are isolated on their own, particularly a lot of elderly people with major health issues, cannot get access to communications. And I think, of course, on one level, we accept when you have this massive flooding and you have damage to infrastructure, yes, of course it is traumatic and difficult to contact people, but this went on for weeks. It was absolutely insane. So we really need to be looking at that. That's something that I'm very strongly advocating, about having specific communication methods for people that are living in areas like ours, so that people can make contact in future. The other issue that Francesca did want me to bring up was to motion number 20, which is the New South Wales rental support, and how low that amount is. And I'm making representations to the state government in relation to that. I think that is way too low in terms of people actually being able to survive in terms of the rental market here, which we know how expensive that is. So I will continue to do that. And of course, there are a number of inquiries underway, and I think it's important that that's one of the issues that comes up. The New South Wales government have an inquiry, and also the New South Wales Upper House have an inquiry as well, and they're going to be coming up here and hosting public forums like this that people can come along. I think it's really important you make your voices heard at those forums as well. I've been advocating also to the New South Wales government and the opposition in terms of those issues, but that's really good to hear from you. So please do that as well. The more people we have talking about the situation, the better capacity we have to ensure that that can be changed. I think also, just briefly as well, a couple other things too. I mean, obviously you've got representatives from council and the mayor here. I think one of the things that our councils need is more funding from state and federal governments to actually look at the infrastructure improvements that need to be made and the mitigation measures as well. And I'm very strongly fighting for that too, because it is very expensive, and that assistance and that level of funding can really only be coming from the state or federal government. So I'm strongly advocating for that. So look, I guess in terms of what I can do for you now, if you have any issues with any of those government payments, please email me. I've also been advocating for a lot of people who have insurance issues as well, contacting the insurance companies and talking through their specific issues. So I'm happy to do all of that for you as well. Please email at any time. Always here to help, whatever those issues might be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to now introduce Deputy Police Commissioner Mal Lanyon, who is on Zoom. Mal would like to say a few words.
Good evening, Francesca. Can you hear me okay? Can everyone hear me? Well, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity, Francesca, to actually be with you this evening. I just apologise to start with the fact that it's by Zoom. I'd much rather be there with you in person, but I'll certainly provide the opportunity that should you at your next meeting wish for me to be there, I'd love to come in person so that we can speak a little bit more personally what we are tonight. But we just start by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we meet, pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It's a great opportunity for me to be here. I was appointed to this role on the 8th of March this year. And one of the first things that was really apparent to me is the need to actually listen to the community. So to understand what community had been through, what's actually required at that stage, and where I could add value to the process to get moving from a state perspective and trying to coordinate get through some of the red tape that currently exists across government. In my normal job, I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Metropolitan Field Operations, so I have responsibility for all of the policing operations in the metropolitan area of Sydney. And I wear a separate hat as the State Emergency Operations Controller. So in that role there, I was actually responsible for coordinating the resources to assist the SES as part of the response phase. So coming across into this recovery role was very much different for me. It was a fairly clear set of objectives I was given, which was really to start to get things moving quickly on the ground up in the Northern Richmond region, and certainly to try to cut through red tape where I possibly could. That's been one of the key focuses I've had since I've been up here. Probably to talk about some of the goals and some of my key priorities coming to this role, and I can quickly touch on these. First is about the clean up, and I think for those of you up here in the region, you know definitely the impact of these terrible floods. When I first came to Lisbon on that first day, I've probably never seen more devastation than we've gone through there. The amount of material that was out on the street in front of houses was it was completely confronting, and I'm sure for those people that actually lost their possessions, it was just terrible. So one of the key focuses for me was trying to get that clean up to move with speed. So at least community could see that there was progress coming, and at least we could see a community probably moving forward from the devastation that taken place. And it's supposed to give you some perspective of the amount of work that was done in that space. And we had the army, we certainly used a lot of contractors and councils. We moved approximately 100,000 tonnes of material by the same stations over the first few weeks, which is quite an incredible feat of logistics. And probably to put it in perspective, we moved more material in the first 4 weeks here than we did in the first 4 months in the Port Macquarie flood some time ago. So on a scale of significant, that probably demonstrates the amount of work that has been through, and the fact that we've moved through what I consider to be the first round of clean-up. It's a really significant step forward just to look at some of the progress in some of those communities, be it Lisbon, be it Woodburn, be it Corrigan. To see the actual improvement in the output there, I think is something significant. It was touched on briefly before, restoration of comms and utilities is one of the key ones. Coming up to this role, the first thing I established was operations coordination from the Southern Cross University, so I had a senior police officer in charge of that. His job was really the task of the AD and all of those agencies that actually need to assist. So the utility companies, the essential energy, be it the telcos, to make sure that they're moving through that. I know we have a lot of criticisms of those agencies for the speed at which the utilities is. But can I say the amount of damage that was occasioned to the actual systems there, the amount of parts that had required replacement, and probably just the ability to get those parts in what has been a local and worldwide shortage has been challenging. But I think there is no doubt the impact that it's had on US communities, and that's something that obviously I'll apologise for and would have liked to have had some of those things move quickly, but I think work has progressed as quickly as we can possibly get that restoration to go. A couple of the other key priorities for restoration of access to those that were isolated, as you're aware, there are a number of communities, particularly those not major communities that were completely isolated. So it was about how we restored access and actually continued supply to those people in the original weeks after it took place. And then emergency housing was a really large, very much a large undertaking for the organisation, for the government to take. We currently have about 1,600 people in emergency housing that have moved back and forward, varying from evacuation centres into more temporary emergency housing. But it is a large undertaking to place people into the northern Rivers region when you understand that there is no significant availability of housing to actually put people in quickly. So that's been a major undertaking. They were the initial priorities, so my priorities have moved across very much into what I call the midterm, so temporary housing, moving people out of emergency accommodation into what you see as temporary villages, what they've been referred to as pop-up villages. Mental health and wellbeing services is something that in this Northern Rivers region that I would consider there was a significant lack of capacity in before this disaster happened. And it's one of the really important things for me to try is to make sure that we don't just focus on infrastructure, we focus on the people and make sure there are sufficient services and they're coordinated. So I haven't seen the stakeholders meeting, which is really just one to come up with a framework to make sure that the agencies aren't crossing over each other and we're getting as much service as we possibly can. It also then enables me to look at where there may be some gaps in capability and capacity, and work with the Minister, who is the Minister for Emergency Services and Flood Recovery, and she's very mindful of mental health and wellbeing of the communities up here in the Northern Rivers. So that's one of the key things that we're working on at the moment. And I think Minister Elliot touched on one of the important ones at the moment, which is grants. And it's about trying to get through some of the challenges with getting money out for grant payments. There has been such a range of grants announced and such a range of grants that do exist. A lot of it really, the criteria for some of those grants probably make it very challenging for the community to access and for the money to go to those members of the community who do so badly. And I think there's research this morning, the state and Commonwealth have been working through trying to make some amendments to the sole trader grant, and that's now been rectified, which will now enable a number of more people to be able to access that grant. So it is one of the ones that we need to take forward, and one of the key learnings for me this role, and whilst I'm doing recovery, very much it would be remiss of me not to be looking at planning and preparation for what we know there will be further disasters in this state, and it's really about having that suite of grants that are ready to go. We know that they're easy to use, and long term.
Thank you, Mal.
That's what happens.
We're getting
Stuff's really good. That just drops all the
I think we'll, I'd like to thank you, Mary can't hear that, but we'll get that back up in a second. I'd like to invite Byron, Shire, Mayor Michael Lyon, who'd like to say a few words about what he's doing to help the north of the district and to update us on the drainage and when it's our turn.
Thanks, Francesca. It's always your turn. Look, thanks for having me back again. I'm always happy to talk about infrastructure, and just to restate what I said 2 weeks ago for those that weren't here, that I'm 100% committed to infrastructure spending in the Shire and to council taking care of its core business. That's the most important thing. You know, you can have all the other little projects and fantasies and things you want to do, but ultimately council is about its roads, its rubbish, its rates, its drainage. It's the things that you pay your rates for, and I'm committed to that. Look, I do want to acknowledge that we are on Bundjalung country and pay my respects to elders past and present. Acknowledge the federal member, Justine Elliot. Thanks for making it, and to the other candidates, good luck in a couple of weeks' time. And I want to thank Lanyon, even though he's not online. He's been amazing to work with, I have to say. Very professional. I've had meetings with him, with the Premier. They seem very committed. Mal particularly, is very committed to this task and to getting it done right. He listens, he takes on board suggestions, and he gets things done. So I want to pay thanks to him, even though he can't hear me. Just quickly, Francesca asked me to give an update on drainage specifically. So I have gone and done a bit of research in preparation for this, and I'll condense it. But since September, we've done 37 separate jobs that have been logged in this area of the Shire. So that's work which includes clearing of culverts, pipes, repairing lintels, and clearing open channels. There's a list of streets I can give up. I'm not going to obviously read that out now, but there's actually been quite a bit of work done. We also, with the Fixing Local Roads project, I think it was about 3.3 million in fixing some of these smaller streets that's been undertaken. And there were 27 roads that were resurfaced in that project, and about 250,000 was spent on the curbs and lintels on those streets. We've also repaired multiple sinkholes and laid 60 metres of new pipe in Aldinga Street, where the existing pipe was identified as beyond repair, and spent 20,000 resolving the flooding issue in Arana Road. Look, we have had a regular presence in terms of cleaning culverts of debris, and we have a second crew moving into South Golden Beach to replace filters in the infiltration pits. What we have had is continual delays from the wet weather, and we have had a lot of reactive maintenance issues in terms of having to redirect crews based on things that are happening, and that's been unfortunately a bit of the story of this year. But having said that, we have managed to spend this budget $425,000 so far this year just on drainage in the north of the Shire, and that's $50,000 over budget. And so we are starting to... Sorry? Well, we do need a bigger budget, but that budget's increased year on year, as I said 2 weeks ago. So we have actually overspent that, and what we're hoping to be able to do is reclaim some of the money we've spent under natural disaster funding, which will free up money in our budget to spend more. It might sound like through these meetings that nothing's being done, but as I sort of said last couple of weeks ago, we are committed to it, and we have actually invested the money in the budget to get some of this work done. And that will continue. So hopefully, as we claim things under the natural disaster funding, that will free up more money that we can spend in this area. Finally, it was mentioned by Francesca, there she is, about why did Suffolk Park get a Guernsey ahead of this area, South Golden Ocean Shores, recently. And the truth is that actually, because of the work that we've done in the drains in this area, we didn't get anywhere near the amount of complaints. So following the flash flooding event in Suffolk Park, there has been a huge amount of correspondence received from that area about the drainage situation in that area. And whilst it feels like it's been neglected up here, I can assure you in terms of infrastructure over the last 20 years, it's not just the north of the Shire that's been neglected. It's been neglect all around when it comes to council infrastructure. Look, I've lived in Suffolk Park, and I can tell you that it's exactly the same there in terms of the quality of the roads and the quality of the drainage. But look, we've finished work in Suffolk Park now in terms of that work, and there are crews now working in this area to clear some of the debris that has been caused by the recent events. Look, that's it. I just wanted to give you an update on drainage, and particularly in terms of the spending. So the spending is happening, and look, we're committed to spending more. So thanks for your time. Cheers.
I think we're going to go back to Mel just quickly to finish off. Mel, we're running behind, but we thought we'd just throw that to finish off. And you might just need to speak a little louder. Mel is having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. Can you hear us?
Francesca. Can you hear me again now?
Yeah, we might just need to speak a little louder if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. Apologies everyone, I'm not sure what happened there. The technical difficulty, I'll be very short from here on in. You're all aware of the announcement of the Northern Rivers Regional Construction Corporation. David Withers, who's the CEO of that corporation. That's really now to work through the process of the rebuild and reconstruction. Francesca, I'll be putting you in touch very quickly with Mr. Withers to sort of get your organisation very much in with you early. And part of David's role at the moment is to really listen and then provide some opportunities with community, understanding the community at the best answers at the moment. So David will be working very quickly. The other one I just want to quickly touch on was the independent inquiry, which Mr. Elliot spoke about before. I was speaking to Mr. Fuller this morning, Francesca. They're going to try and organise a community meeting from your community.
A community meeting for the Northern District. Thank you now. Yep.
Correct. If not, we will organise a virtual opportunity for you. So I'll get you to work through that.
Thank you.
So push you.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. And thanks for coming on tonight. Thank you. Thanks, Al. We're getting our own meeting with the state flood inquiry, so that's I've asked now to help me with that, so that should happen soon. We'd like to now hear from Councillor Alan Hunter. Have you got a few words to say? Words of encouragement, words of wisdom. Something.
Well, thank you for having me. And I've got to acknowledge the former owners of the land which we met today, and the leaders and the emerging and president, of course. I would like to compliment everyone on coming together. It's surprising it's only adversity that really brings people together. Previous generations had wars and depressions. We've escaped all of that. So when we get to this sort of experience, it's quite a novel, if you call it. It's quite a unique experience for us. And I think the way we handle it, we can take lessons from our past. We have to narrow down our target. What is the issue here? Is it to recover from the flood? Or is it to prevent another one? Or to become more flood resistant or flood tolerant? Because I don't think we're going to stop floods. I think they'll come in whatever form. Sometimes they'll be bigger than the last one, sometimes they'll be smaller than the last one. But in any case, I think what we can learn and what we can do from here is equip ourselves better for the next one. That means thinking about what we have to do now. I've seen, the program here with the 26 recommendations for council or staff or the federal or state politicians. At the end of the day, there's not too many of them relate to flood, or an awful lot that don't. I don't know why we've got to tell council to do their own maintenance rather than getting contractors in for the road repairs. I know, and as most councillors do, how difficult it is to change things. I came onto council 10 years ago with the idea of changing council to the point where we get more focused on running it like a business, becoming more service orientated, getting sharper at the things we do and how we do. You know what? I don't think I've made one little bit of difference. As hard as I've tried, I don't think I've made any difference. So I don't want to lead you into a path where you get despondent before we get the job done. And I think the job that we have to do is to actually reduce the flood dependence or the flood frequency by 50%. If we can concentrate on that, everything we do narrows down to that point. Then we've got some chance. The rest of it we can add in as we go. As we get a little closer, we can find things to add in there that might give us some benefit. At the end of the day, I think we've got to be all focused on our end goal to reduce the influence of floods by 50%. And if we can achieve that in 12 months or 2 years or 3 years, whatever time it takes. But we need some KPIs, we need a steering committee. You know, the best committee I've ever, Councillor's heard this a few times, the best committee I've ever served on has been a committee of 3 who went to hell and missing. It's not about getting numbers, it's about doing the job. It's about getting an outcome. And we've got some really good people here. Francesca and her team have put together a good team. That what we need to do now is to ensure and encourage them to focus, narrow their focus down to our outcome, not the process. That's how you do it. We want to know what we do, and where we go, and how we do it. I'm a farmer, I've got to confess, and I've been doing it for a while. And I've, experienced a lot of floods, and droughts, and fires, grasshoppers, it's been across my bow at some point. And every time I've had a recovery process, I've had to say, what's the main game here? How do we get out of it? And we usually do. But you've got to stay focused. We can't get distracted. And there's a lot of distractions out there. Politics, everything, distractions. Stay focused. Anyway, all the best, and I'm here to help. I'm from the government.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Councillor Asren Pugh, who's actually championed a couple of our notions of motions. Asren, you're on.
Not quite sure how to follow that one, Alan. I'll echo some of the sentiments from some other speakers and thank you all for coming. As the Mayor just said, it's all about where the most complaints come from, so keep being squeaky. One of the things that we took away from the meeting we had a couple of weeks ago was, and look, I've seen this in the election campaign and so forth. I got elected at the end of last year, so I'm just new to being a councillor. I'm certainly not going to make any excuses for council for the last 20 years of neglect of the north of the Shire. But one of the things we did was, with the support of the councillors here, tabled an urgent notice of motion to the last council meeting, which tabled all of the demands that Francesca and you guys talked about at the last meeting and put in a timetable for response. It's been my experience generally with council that, people will get noisy, they'll make demands, and then all those issues just get lost in bureaucracy. And as Alan was talking about, it gets lost in process. People like yourselves don't know what's going on. What happened to that request that we made of our elected officials, our elected representatives? So we've put in place a timetable to actually get a proper response from council to the demands that the community up here has put forward. A couple of the other things that I put on the agenda for the next council meeting towards the end of May are some of the issues that have been raised, which include, and something that the Mayor raised at the last meeting as well, the reported $260,000 underspend on drainage maintenance in 2020-2021. Getting a report on the historical proportion of infrastructure spending in the north of the Shire, a timeline for an assessment of drains and sewer infrastructure in the north of the Shire, proposed works program for sewage and drainage in the north of the Shire for the next 3 years. Some of that is included in a budget that's about to go out or has gone out on exhibition. It does include some of that work for the north of the Shire, so let's have a look at it, but I want it in a concise report. That Council's internal drain clearing team, which we have apparently, prioritise the north of the Shire for the next 6 months. That members, including yourself, residents, are invited specifically to report on the worst cases of drainage and sewer network disrepair, and that a staff briefing, council staff briefing, be organised within 2 weeks of the council meeting in consultation with representatives here to discuss the program of works priorities and budget allocations for the next 3 years. The Mayor outlined some issues, some great spending and some great initiatives that are being done. But if you guys don't have input into what's being done, if you guys don't get feedback and know what's being done, then how do you know what's being done? So that's part of the process, is a proper consultation, a proper discussion with you about the work that needs to be done. It shouldn't just be up to staff themselves to set the priorities for what needs to be fixed. Another issue that's in the request is that we have a master plan for the north of the Shire. Most other communities in the Shire have a master plan. We need one for the north of the Shire. It's not going to be a quick process, but it is essential for making sure you've got projects, you've got plans ready to go when you chase up Justine, Elliot and the state government for funding for those projects. If you don't have them ready to go, you're not going to get funding for them. So it's a key thing we need into the future. There are a whole bunch of issues, as Francesca talked about. There were requests for dredging, requests for opening up to the ocean, requests for removing rock walls at Brunswick Heads. They all need to be re-looked at by the committees of experts that we have when they're reviewing this plan. So that's another motion I've got to go into the next council meeting. I want to get to the bottom of being able to fast track DA processes for applications that are directly related to rebuilding for flood affected properties. You know, we have people asking, I want to raise my house, what's going to happen with my DA? And to date, council doesn't really have a great answer for that. We need that to happen as quickly as possible. We need advice for residents on appropriate standards for rebuilding within flood impacted areas, including building materials and structural issues. And we are requesting the council provide advice on likely changes to flood heights. Now, some of this might not be possible. These are all proposed motions, so we'll see if we can get the rest of councillors to support these motions as well. And lastly, but not least, is the issues that have been raised that council really can't do anything about, but we can certainly add our voice officially to support some of those things, which is the inadequacy of the $7,200 in rental support, the lack of resilience in communications network, which Justine talked about as well, and a support for government reinsurance or insurance subsidies for those areas that are currently, like yourselves, finding it really difficult to find insurance at all or affordable insurance. So look, there's some of the things. I just wanted to give you some practical responses to what you've asked for. They'll be discussed at the council meeting on May 26th. Look, let's hope there's 9 councillors. I'm just one. I'm proposing these. Let's hope that we get support for these items going forward so that we can just really start to address some of the issues that you've raised. Alan talked about the need for action, and that's what this is about. It's about getting stuck in and getting some things done. Thank you all very much, but I will just leave it with this. Stay squeaky. Thank you.
Asren, how many of our recommendations have you moved as motions? Can we count?
Oh, some of them are all jumped in together. It'll probably be
We're going to consider
14, maybe, but
Oh, okay.
but there's a response to all of them due by the 20.
There's a song from Little Things
22nd
Big.
of June.
There's a song from Little Things Big Things Grow. Thank you. Asren Rockstar. Thanks, Asren. That's great. That's why we're having these meetings, to get attention. I'd like to introduce Councillor Mark Swivel to say a few words.
Thanks, Francesca. From little things, big things grow, as you just said, Francesca. This is actually the 3rd meeting in this community. 25 people met at Rachel Doyle's house some 4 weeks ago. Now, Rachel's house is still drying out, as I understand it, and she's gone back to Ireland to chill out in the meantime. And we had, 200 people or more at the 2nd meeting? And there's around that number here tonight. And this is really democracy in action. This is the kind of thing that achieves change. Michael was right earlier to indicate that the core business of council is infrastructure. We need to get the basics right. But the reality is, as Michael acknowledged, that the basics have been underfunded for a long time. I think the reality of the region as a whole, and especially in Byron Shire, is that infrastructure, beginning with drains and sewerage, but also roads and even larger issues like a sewage treatment plant set up, for example, we're dealing with infrastructure that's undercooked. So there's a massive opportunity right now in this crisis for change, to deal with that. And really, it's you who are going to make that change happen. The work that we're doing, that Asren outlined at Council, is hugely important. I'd like to back up what Alan had to say too about the service orientation of Council. I was also a bit surprised to see your talent as a stand-up comedian, Alan, but it's good to come out and be surprised at my age. In any event, I think that this moment is a huge opportunity for this community. The flood inquiry winds up its submission taking from the community on the 20th of May, and then it feeds recommendations into the Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation. And that entity will have huge powers. And it tells you something important, that corporation was established. It's not a moment for business as usual thinking. We have systems in place, systems that achieve a lot, but systems that could be improved. And the corporation wants to hear, not just from Council, but from community groups like this. They want to hear your personal stories, and they want to know what the actual solutions are to respond to this moment. And the reality of this moment is that Ocean Shores exemplifies what climate change looks like. That's what's happening here. Ocean Shores also reflects key dynamics of the housing crisis, the emergency that Council declared. And to continue the theme that we've all been exploring in these meetings, the undercooked infrastructure of this community that you deal with day in, day out. And whether we're talking about big solutions or little ones, this is an opportunity for change. And I think you need to keep being that squeaky wheel, because from little things, big things will grow. And drains on a permanent basis will hopefully be clearer. Drains on a permanent basis will be better. And hopefully we look at the whole area in a new light, thinking about the kind of community that we want to create in 30, 40, 50 years' time. And if you get the story right that you tell to the inquiry, if you get the story right that feeds into the Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation, then there's a chance that your kids and their grandkids will live in a very different community, a better community, and one that is much more resilient when it comes to floods. So I'd just like to leave you with that idea that this is a huge opportunity, and it's fantastic in a time where, let's face it, people are pretty cynical about politics and government. I mean, I can bear, with the greatest of respect to my friends Mandy and Justine, and Kimberley, sorry. I can barely watch the coverage of this campaign. It is like, look away now. But you guys have all turned up, and you're going to keep turning up. And it's a huge achievement to get a flood inquiry meeting in this community. It's a hard-won victory, that, and I think you should be very pleased with yourselves for having done that, and it could be a pathway to some great achievements here. So thanks for coming out, thanks for your support, and we look forward to acting on all of the good stuff that you've suggested to us. Thanks, Francesca. Good on you.
Mandy Nolan's just arrived. Thank you, Mandy. Mandy and Kimberley and David will be speaking in the second half of the meeting. Question time. I'm trying to find my place in my notes. Questions. Does anybody have any questions of anybody that's spoken? And Bintu is going to go around with one of the microphones. Any questions of anyone who's just spoken?
I've got Mark there.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Just a question to Justine regarding the funding grants, or the funding direct from federal and state. Are they tax accessible? Do you know if that's going to be an issue with those funding grants?
They shouldn't be, but if you have any problems, again, come back to me on that one, but they shouldn't be.
Well, just
Yeah, just clarify that. I
Just to
think
clarify
someone
that.
today in Service New South Wales, we got some information that Michael and I were talking. I think they are tax accessible.
The state government ones, so they say they're going to do that, are they?
Yes.
Well, let me chase that one specifically up for you then, because that makes it even more difficult if they're included as part of the council. So I will see, can I see you when we have a break and get that information for you? I wasn't aware that they had done it. Okay. All right, I'll talk to you anyway.
Thanks, Justine.
What have we got next?
Good evening. I'm not sure who to direct this question to. And excuse me, I didn't know the second meeting was on, so I don't know what happened. But I live on a hill, and I'm not sure if the issue's been brought up about there's a property above me, and there's been no drainage put in by the person above me. What happens, and who do I speak to?
I've got that, my question.
Sure. Hey, Ronnie. Look, the short answer is that that's something which is at a detailed level that you'll need to bring to council, like council staff. And it's possibly one of the two things. It depends on when they built compared to you. It depends on the conditions of the DA. So it's one of those detailed ones where I couldn't possibly give you the answer yes or no, but it's going to depend on the circumstances of the case. So if they haven't followed the DA conditions and there was a condition in about drainage, then you'll have some relief. If there wasn't, then negotiation is going to be the way forward.
Okay, thank you. It was a new bill, so it's within 2 years of being completed.
Then to make an appointment with council staff and go through the site-specific stuff.
That's wonderful. And that is one of our recommendations as well. For council to look into the percentage of soil versus concrete. I've got that at my place as well. I spoke to a town planner yesterday at council and they said that there's no rules at council for the percentage grass that you have to keep at your block. So, yes, that's one of the things that we need to look at. Who would like to ask a question?
I guess this is for Michael and any of the other councillors who might be aware of this. I'm told there's a pump at South Bolden Beach. And say it wasn't effective on this occasion. And I'm also told that the pump runs off electricity, and that the reason it wasn't working was because there was no electricity. And I'm quite surprised that we have an emergency pump that was running off electricity when it's quite normal in storms to lose your electricity.
The pump's also upside down, the electric's on the bottom.
Sorry, say it again.
The pump's also upside down, the electric's at the bottom. The electric's around the bottom. No, there's a few problems with the pumps.
Okay, so my question is, why do we have it like that, and when is it going to be fixed?
Yes.
And will it actually work? Will it actually work effectively in the future to remove the volume of water that's coming in, which came in from several points, including one point where I took photographs during the previous flood and provided them to council and showed how the water was coming in from Fern Beach, and I was told that it would be rectified, and that was never done either. That was about 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, one of the things you need in this job is to not take things personally. So, I won't, because this is actually a good news story about the pump, and I'll tell it as with the least pride and as dispassionately as I can. But when I first came across this pump issue in the last term, the way it was built was completely wrong, and it was designed to deal with a huge volume of water. And actually, what was happening every time the water would come in, it would get rid of it so quickly that it would burn out in the process because there would be no water left. So what we did was we actually improved. I drove this myself. We approved the change in the way the pump operates, so that it actually has the ability to deal with the right volume of water and actually operate properly. And it actually now does operate properly for what it was designed to do. And what it was designed to do is in a medium flood event was to take the water from one part of the channel and stick it over to the other part so that the properties that behind the pump wouldn't flood. And that's all good and well, and it worked perfectly for that purpose, right up to the point that the water got so high that it didn't matter anyway, because you're only taking it from the water's already higher, right? And then the power goes out.
Pump needs to pump the water into the ocean.
Well, so that pump, in terms of pumping the water, that pump into the ocean is like equivalent to me getting out there in effective terms with a glass of a glass, a pint glass, and doing, like, it's not designed for a major flood like that to take water out to the ocean or anywhere else.
It actually did keep the water level down till 10:30 in the morning.
That's the
on that
point.
Monday.
That's
But
the point.
it did do its job until the power cut out.
That's the point. It does, and that's what actually we're really quite happy about, is that in a medium event, it saved those houses, and it will save those
It could have
houses.
continued to save houses.
Well, no, because even if you attached a line to the ocean, that pump could not possibly deal with the volume of water that was
So
required
it's one
to
of the
deal with.
topics later on that we're talking about is that we need infrastructure that doesn't deal with just the 1 in 100, that is it possible to have infrastructure that deals with the 1 in
Sometimes,
500?
unfortunately, you have to give answers that people don't like. That pump is designed for a medium event where you're getting it from one part of the channel to another so that it actually stops the back flooding of those properties. In a large event, that pump is useless. And if you were talking about what you needed to do, you would need something that,
And also that pump doesn't help some streets.
So it's in one of the recommendations in the white folder to look at the South Bolden Beach.
one thing that has been identified is to make sure that the berm or the levee there is at the same height, because it is coming in. So there is work to be done, and there are lessons to be learned. But one thing we did get from all of that is the pump will actually work really well in those medium events.
Okay, yeah, we need to move on. It is in the white folder. One of the recommendations is to look at the South Bolden Beach. Yeah, we only have time for one more question.
I'd also like to talk about not just the pump station at South Bolden Beach. The pump station does do quite well until the electricity goes out. But also too, the drains don't drain. We had the water there way before this event happened, and it doesn't drain away. The drains are not excavated enough. Someone was saying last meeting something about a 1% fall in the drain to the pump station. So maybe there's no water at the other end, but there's plenty down in Helen Street side of the drain, because it's not getting away. We have water there all the time again now, and those drains honestly have not been touched. And we learned a little bit from the 2005 flood for 5 minutes, and then everything just got left again. It was like we got a couple of clean outs of the drain, and honestly, the grass is over my head in there. There's trees growing in there. My part is where I'm the only side of the street that's got curb and guttering in South Bolden Beach. I can't even clean my curb out, which I've taken all the silt out. But where the easement is, it's just overgrown onto the road. We have no footpaths for people to walk on, and this easement's coming out. It's all blocked up. Water just keeps coming and gets stopped there, so it can't even drain into the drain. It has to go sort of around it or whatever. It just kind of stops, and then it kind of has to go over it. But those easements are just, they're going to be full of rubbish and stuff. And, I thought maybe somebody might come down and have a little bit of a look at it. We've got more rain coming tomorrow. And what's going to happen tomorrow and the next few days, when we've got hundreds of mills coming at us again, our drains are still full of water, they don't get away. I mean, that pump station could be pumping the stuff out. Why doesn't it have a generator? Every kind of time there is a weather event, like such a thing where we flood, and, the power goes out, why isn't there a generator to take it over, like that's what most places do, like everything to do with
Well,
us.
the beach pump and levy is in the report that's going to be looked at.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying about the station, it's sort of, it does work to a certain degree until power goes out, but yeah, the water's got to get to it.
And we are talking a bit more about South Bolden Beach later, so we'll come back to South Bolden Beach. Sure. We've run out of time, but if it's a quick one.
Having all the South Bolden Beach Community Association, what I want to know is, you in 2001 put in no fill on the floodplain. Is that still applicable? Councillor. 2001, after Fern Beach was built, there was no fill meant to be imported in any way, shape or form into South Bolden Beach and Brighton on any of the Marshall Creek floodplain. Has that been looked at? We have fill being imported now.
It's all in the whole flood mitigation
I know where it is, great, I know, but I'm just
issues that are being looked at in the white folder, that's what we're talking about next. Yeah, so, yeah. Okay, so we have to move to,
Can we get an answer to that question? Would that be possible?
When the staff do that,
No, you can't.
they monitor that, approve and recommend the development applications, and we're not across every one of them.
No, I don't think you can bring it in.
Staff.
everything to do with flood mitigation is in this white folder, which we're going to talk about right now. So let's switch to the next part of the meeting. And as I said earlier, the purpose of we will have more opportunities to talk. Okay, so we have to move to,
Can we get an answer to that question?
Taken on notice. We don't, the staff do that. They monitor that, approve and recommend the development applications, and we're not across every one of them. So we have to get an answer from staff.
everything to do with flood mitigation is in this white folder, which we're going to talk about right now. So let's switch to the next part of the meeting. And as I said earlier, the purpose of we will have more opportunities to talk about everything that's coming up throughout the meeting. As I said earlier, the purpose of the steering committee is to ask the right questions and to take everyone's feedback and feed that into the next iteration of the white folder. So let's look at before flooding preparation for councils and households, and we'll also hear from SES in a minute. So to start with, the first recommendation in the white folder was to form a steering committee, and we've done that, and Alan Hunter suggested that as well. We also need, if we can scroll up a little bit. Thanks, guys. Yeah, you kept scrolling up, yeah. Council preparation. So we need council to clean and repair stormwater and sewage pipes, improve roads. That's all part of the recommendations that we've already put forward. I'm going to speed through this because we're behind on time now. Drainage, house drains, street drains, that's all part of the floodplain management report. And it's connected to, we have connected lots of recommendations to council to try to get those flood mitigation measures actioned sooner than later. There is, I think I'm going to skip ahead a couple of things because I'm going to skip to SES because we're running out of time, or we're behind time. SES, thank you, Janine, isn't it? Janet, sorry, is going to talk to us about what we can do to prepare our own homes. And then we're going to be talking with Ziwar, Robyn, Mandy, Kimberley and David.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Janet. Am I okay to walk around?
Oh no, actually, sorry. Robert wants us to stand here with the lights.
You're in the movies now.
Lucky us. Thank you.
I feel like a deer in the headlights. So thank you once again, Francesca, and also to Oscar for allowing me to come along tonight and just have a really quick talk to you about, what's coming up in the next 5 to 10 days. Before I do that, I do want to acknowledge what you guys have been through as a community, not just here, but it's the whole Northern Rivers. And I know there's trauma still ongoing here and, as I said, in a number of places. I'm a community engagement officer. I'm out there with the people, so I'm seeing what's happening and I've been through it with you. The other thing I wanted to acknowledge too is our local SES. We only have, it's based in Mullumbimby. There's less than 20 members, and every year I think we get over can someone correct me on this, 2 million visitors per year on top of our 90,000. So we've got 20 people looking after over 2 million people. So, and they're volunteers. So, but I also want to acknowledge it's not just then in a catastrophic event, I call it catastrophic, I know it's a buzzword at the moment, but it really was, and it wasn't only SES, it was Surf Life Saving who were here out helping you guys. Yep. I heard Marine Rescue were here on the streets. I heard police. It was a combined effort, but not only with emergency services, it was with you guys as community. And that's how it should be. We should be working together when these hard times hit. And it's the work we do beforehand in building those relationships and setting up, our networks that are going to get us through the next event when it comes.
Do we have any tips for us to prepare our houses?
I do. I did want to, just before I get to that, and I'll be quick with this. So, just so you're aware, these meetings, we're going around, we've got 8 or 9 meetings across the Northern Rivers. Just to let you guys know, we're aware there's anxiety in the area, and we're coming out now before an event happens to say that not to panic, number one. There is rain occurring there's a significant weather event occurring in Queensland at the moment. The Bureau of Meteorology are not confirming yet that it's coming down to affect our area, but we as SES are already preparing because we know what's happened in the past. You hear everything about Queensland, then all of a sudden, overnight, it slips down into our area. So what I'm asking you to do is, when you go home and, over the next 24 hours, have to think about how you prepare your homes. If you need sandbags, SES have already got a sand dump ready. And can you tell me where it's at?
The sports fields in Shire.
Yep. So sandbags are there and there's a sand dump if you want to prepare for your own homes. Please, if you do go down there, register it with 132500 because that gives us an idea of if we need to bring more out and we register your request. Secondly, so we're meeting with the Bureau of Meteorology each day to monitor this situation, and we will be putting out information via media over the ABC and out through our social media posts. SES at Mullumbimby have a Facebook page. It's a local page. I highly recommend you follow that page because we put out every update, every warning, evacuation product on there. I understand that communication is an issue in these past events, and I really applaud that Justine is trying to fight for better communications for our whole area. We do need it. If there are any questions, please come up to me afterwards. And I said I'd be short.
Yep, thank you.
The main aim was to, stay informed, not alarmed, and we'll be prepared for the next one if it occurs. Thank you.
We are going to... Okay, so back to the white folder. PMO4 and PMO1, revising flood planning levels, calibrating new flood data, waterproofing houses and elevating houses. Ziwar, would you be able to talk about those points in the recommendations?
Yes, I can. So Francesca, Rob and Janet and myself met earlier this week, and we discussed the council recommendations, and we were looking to allocate those recommendations into 4 categories. I think Francesca touched on those earlier. Those categories are before flood preparedness, during flood, after flood support and flood mitigation. These 4 points. Yep, no worries. Is that better? Great. So PM04 is talks to flood planning levels. So this is a recommendation put forward in the report from council to revise the flood planning levels in the Byron local environmental plan. And what that does is allow those who are flood affected and who have resubmitted DAs for rebuilding to build at higher levels. This would obviously reduce the impacts of the future flooding event on that specific property or dwelling if it was to be rebuilt. Subsequent to that, you would have to raise height plane restrictions, because you can't just raise the floor and not expect to gain that ceiling height. So in future, that would help immensely for those who are in those areas that are majorly affected. PM09 is the next point down, and that also talks to flood planning levels. This point specifically is to provide additional information on the 10.7 planning certificates, and each of your properties should have a planning certificate, and typically they're appended to contracts of sale, so they're available for future potential purchasers, or if anyone's interested in selling their homes, the flood information and flood behaviour should be represented on those certificates. Council has also suggested looking into developing a GIS system that's an online interactive map system, which will talk to the flood levels and the revised floodplain levels. The 2022 events will need to be, the information will need to be collected from the community, from the Bureau of Meteorology, as well as yourselves, and we're collecting photos. This will have to be implemented into the revised flood planning levels, and that would ultimately affect the severity of the size of the flood planning area. So residents do need to be aware that if this point PM04 was to be pursued, that some houses which were considered not flood affected will eventually form part of the houses or the dwellings that fall within the flood planning areas, which in many cases is it's a negative outcome for some of the existing properties on a paperwork perspective. As you've seen, you're already affected in that area, so you would prefer to have a solution in place future, but there is a downfall in having that suggestion pursued strongly.
So we'll stop at PM04 just for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
and we'll, thank you.
Great, no worries.
Thank you, Ziwar. So we're just trying to chunk this down because it was quite complicated to aggregate it all together to make it make sense. So what Ziwar is saying is that in preparation for a flood, we will need to look at waterproofing houses and elevating houses. That's what that recommendation PM04 and PM01 is all about. Our NOM 21, there's a lot of numbers flying around. We're making a recommendation to get a government subsidy for raising houses, and Mandy Nolan is championing that for us to achieve some subsidies so that we can be assisted with raising our houses. So thank you, Mandy.
Thank you for everyone who's attending tonight. It's such an important conversation, and I do gather, Francesca, I'll be getting up to address the noms.
Yes.
Throughout, so I won't do them all. So this is around the house raising, and interestingly, this is something that I had met with some members of the community, namely a woman called Vanessa Allport, who has started a group. I don't know if some of you have made contact with her, and that's kind of what the community does. And she's set up a group called Save Our River Towns, which is around having a broader conversation around some of the outcomes that you might want to see. This is what you can do as a community, is make those contacts. It's called Save Our River Towns, and it's about having those conversations in community about what outcome is going to suit you. So for some people, they will want to have their house raised. There's already a state government assistance plan that assists for raising houses. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work very well at all. It's not raising many houses at all. Raising expectations and then disappointing people seems to be the most that it can do. It is a scheme which is allocated by the government statewide, and it is really a scheme that needs to address in a more localised way. So what's happened, for instance, it's a scheme where 2/3 of the house lifting is paid by the state government, and 1/3 could be paid by the council, but tends to then go to the person who wants to voluntarily have their house raised. But very often, of course, if you're a pensioner or you're someone who's on a minimum, income, which is most of us in this region, then you're going to struggle to do that. Now, right now in Tweed, for voluntary house raising, and to actually meet this scheme, there's 4 houses that met the criteria, which of course with this scheme is quite steep. And 2 years on, they still haven't had their houses raised. That doesn't bode well for the scheme. It's clear that there are real problems with something that could actually create a real difference for people in how you survive the floods. In our region, in the Brunswick Valley, it's been assessed and this doesn't actually show the number of the real houses that have been impacted, but it has been shown here that there's 58 houses that would be eligible under the criteria currently for house raising, if that was to happen. But currently the government doesn't have. Well, what's happened is because of the way they actually record the data, it doesn't reflect in the criteria. It's not up to date with our experience. And that's why it's incredibly important now that you submit to the flood inquiry what your experience is. They can only create the data that is going to create the framework so that you can then be eligible for funding to go towards house lifting if it's actually recorded. So that's why it's really important. So if you're someone for whom this is a real option that's going to be something that's going to allow you to be resilient when you're hit by floodwaters, then I suggest that you do get that in. It's an incredibly important option that we have that we can do very quickly. It's economically, it's viable because you maintain your housing, you don't lose downtime. But of course, we are looking at having to fast track it. And I know the council has said that's something that they will do, fast tracking the approvals so that can happen. But what we have to push for first is the changes that are recognised from the flood inquiry that will go to the Reconstruction Corporation so that we can push very strongly to have more of those lifts funded. So that's where we've got to start. We've got to start by doing that. In the meantime, I think joining those groups and actually having those conversations about who in the community, in your community, I know, for instance, in some streets, they've already formed small groups of people who are going to get their house lifted. And then they've created, 6 or 7 people so that then they can create or actually lobby for a cheaper price overall for all of them. So this is something we need to push for though, because if you're not covered by insurance, it is going to be hard for a lot of people to afford this. And of course, it's going to be, some time coming to get the construction in to actually do it. But it needs to happen ASAP, and it should be something that is prioritised by the Reconstruction Corporation once you get that data in. So the first thing you do is get those submissions in so that we can change the data so that you can access the funding to get your house lifted. So, okay, that's that, Nom. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to take the microphone off. Thank you. Hang on. We have a microphone issue, so we have to be clipped each time. We have a microphone issue going on. So one of the biggest problems with raising houses is DAs in council, and anyone that's lodged a DA with Byron Shire Council will know how long it takes. We've asked in our NOM number 9 that council fast track DAs for anything related to housing, anything related to quality of life, and to deprioritise non-essential DAs such as pools, driveways and commercial DAs, and just focus on housing. Councillor Asren Pugh has raised a motion already, thank you. I believe that fast-tracking DAs was raised in February, and only a couple of councillors supported it, and obviously most councillors did not support it. That was before the flood. I'm hoping that now that we have flooded, that all councillors will support it and let that go through. We really do need DAs to be processed faster. Do we have Mark Grant? Where's Mark? Mark, you rang council the other day and about raising your home. Oh, you have to come to me because I'm clipped in. And what did council say when you rang to say that you needed to raise your house and you needed to lodge a DA after they laughed at you? What happened? Maybe not that bad, but what happened?
It wasn't quite that bad, but they did, I think, quite reasonably point out that there's a lot of factors affecting their ability to process DAs in faster. There's got to be another way. Can the Reconstruction Authority help? Can private certifiers help? I think we need to be looking at all those things that enable people who would like to and can benefit from raising their houses, that they can do it in a reasonable time. I've had advice
next
from
page.
the campaigner this week that says expect 9 months.
Next page.
Just for the approval. Just for the approval. To do nothing other than raise the house. That's not extending the house, not building anything underneath.
Just to raise it.
Just raising it above the flood level. There has to be a better way than that. In Queensland, for example, the certifiers take care of simple applications. It's done in 2 weeks. That's where we should be getting to here.
Thank you, Mark. So I guess I'm grandstanding a bit here and making a point of DAs. Because they are a problem. We really do need to fast track them. Another thing that we need council to consider is to look at building materials for flood prone areas. I bought my place at South Golden Beach a year ago, and the floor was made of chipboard. I knew it wouldn't survive a flood. It did turn into wheat bix as expected. So we also have a recommendation to council to look at building materials. A lot of folks that have sealed hardwood floors sealed on both sides, their floors survived. I have a neighbour on one side whose floor survived, and then another neighbour whose floor didn't survive because the hardwood was only sealed on one side. So there are things that can be done, and we're hoping that council can lead the way in recommending what materials we should be using. The other thing that has come up in the white folder is PM08. Can we go to PM08? Fantastic. And that is that there might be some properties that are worse affected. I'm skipping ahead because we're running behind time and some other things a bit self-explanatory. What this means is that there might be some properties that the white folder comes back and says will need to be looked at in terms of being purchased. We're recommending in our Notice of Motion 23 is that we're advocating for purchases to be made at pre-flood market value, not value at general and not post-flood market value. This is quite important because if any houses do need to be purchased in the infrastructure that needs to be put in, we want to make sure that it's not value at general. I'm going to throw to Mark again. I know that you're a lawyer and a commercial property lawyer. There's something called fair value, is that right?
look, I'm not actually a lawyer, but I know a little bit about real
You
estate
look like
law.
You have a law degree.
I would have thought that with the general law in New South Wales for compulsory acquisition on just terms, would apply.
We've all seen the castle.
We've all seen the castle, exactly right. So I think that's a reasonably straightforward thing for government to support.
Yeah, thank you. We just want to make sure that what the steering committee will be doing is we'll be advocating for any properties that do need to be purchased, that they're purchased at fair value or just purchase. Speeding along, FDC, I don't know why some of the recommendations in the white folder have numbers and some don't, but one of them is about Billynudgel Railway Bridge, and Rob is going to talk a bit about Billynudgel.
I can cover that later.
Oh, okay.
Mitigation.
Yep, okay, let's cover it later. Excellent. Same as PM03, it refers to zoning use, so that refers to areas of land being rezoned, and again, that puts some houses at risk. So it's important for the steering committee to be advocating for keeping our houses and not rezoning, and looking for other options that ensuring that other solution studies are looked into, and that purchase of houses is the final end of the road. PM11 is another recommendation of the 24 recommendations in the white folder. It suggests looking at illegal builds and illegal usage under houses. We're advocating for compassion to be given. Because of the severe lack of affordable housing, we are the most expensive land in Australia, and we have more expensive rates than Willoughby in Sydney, and we have a housing crisis. So the steering committee will be advocating for regularising and keeping illegal builds and making them legal. Of course, they have to comply with the Building Code of Australia, but what we're advocating for is that this is a complex social issue, not just a compliance issue. So let's get those buildings up to scratch. Let's fix the houses up, waterproof them, raise them, and keep them rather than demolishing them, because we need more houses, not less. We can't promise that we can achieve that, but that's the sort of thing that the steering committee is going to be advocating for. So we've come to the end of the first section. I've skipped through a few things because they'll come out in the next section. We do need to have 5 minutes question answer, and then we do need to go to a break because there are some people that need to leave, and we're vastly over time. So I'm going to be much stricter. It's going to be a minute per person, so that gives us 5 questions. And I think Bintu's on microphone. And I'm going to time this. Crack out the timer.
I've got a quick question. I'm a resident in Ocean Shores on Kumara Crescent, and our house accesses the main drainage for the whole street area, or outlet, effectively. I've been trying to get in touch with council for over 2 years and finally got somebody, and he even got promised that something will happen. Nothing happened. It's very hard to get hold of people. It's really taking a lot of effort from a young family to secure their home and make sure that water from the street isn't just flushing through the house multiple times every year. The main point or question I've got is, we've been talking about service previously. Is council investing in more staff to obviously help staff as well act on those requests, and also enable staff not to be overloaded with work and actually action certain things, so they also are able then to pick up phones and take inquiries?
Good question. Michael, would you like to answer that?
I'm happy to give a response. I think I'm happy to look into that specific address if you give it to me as well. But what I'd say to you, one of the problems councils face, this goes to DA processing, it goes to engineering, it goes to flooding, it goes to across the entirety of council business, and to all businesses in this Shire. is that you can recruit staff, but you can't house them. So,
Yeah.
so that's one of the major issues we've got. I mean, our DA staff, for example, are actually processing more DAs per person by a factor of 50% more than the state average in New South Wales. We have something like an increased amount of DAs for a council our size, like a huge amount of development pressure. And we don't have the tools in order to be able to actually satisfy them. This is why, for me, housing has been the critical issue for years, is the critical issue. And the sooner we can get some wins in that space, the sooner we can actually start employing people to deal with issues like you're talking about and actually sit. So that's the fundamental crisis for me, is housing.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity that needs to be taken most in the coming months.
Thanks, Michael. And that's why we're asking council to deprioritise non-essential DAs and prioritise DAs that connect with housing and quality of life.
And just briefly on that, we didn't reject that suggestion back in February. What we said was we already do that. We already do triage DAs and deal with the easy ones quickly first.
Yeah.
And the other ones on. Just to qualify what
We don't seem so sure from all the councillors. I hope that motion, that Councillor Asren Pugh's re-raising that motion, is that right? Was that one of your motions, the DA motion?
Yeah, the motion is about fast-tracking flood DAs in particular, because they are so important to people.
Well, it should be anything that creates a house, whether it's flood affected or not, because we need more houses rather than less.
And that was absolutely, but we need to prioritise those people who need to get back into their house. If they need a DA, council should be getting that done as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
That's where we need these politicians to help us, because we haven't got the power there.
That's what they need.
If I could just say that it takes a month to get a house approved for development in Logan City, to the south. That's right. I just took nearly a year to get a garage.
all these suburbs we can get
Thank you, Gary, speaking out the
Just talking about speed to develop application. Well, there's a problem. It needs to be solved. I don't see why we don't have the problem solved here, but they have solved in Logan.
And we've got a good question here from Ziwar. Can houses be done, Michael, as a complaint development rather than a whole full-blown DA? I guess the answer probably no. Like,
why can't we use CDC processing to build more housing?
Complaint development.
We can have, what's stopping council from being able to hand approvals over to certifiers and issue CDC?
Private certifiers.
To build houses within 3 months. It's done in other places. I just want to know what the issue is for council now. Where do they need assistance in terms of amending planning instruments to allow for CDC approvals?
It's not a bad idea.
It's a detailed response. Just quickly, I would say that there's a difference between Brisbane. There's a difference between Brisbane and Queensland and their planning system and what they allow private certifiers to do at the governmental level, or what they allow in New South Wales. It's more limited in terms of what we can outsource to private service. And if you're talking about private certifiers, that's out of our hands anyway. Anyone who's under the legislation allowed to use private certifier doesn't have to come to us. So it's about what's allowed in the various. Queensland's a lot more liberal for a state, well, part of the critical part of it, at a state level when it comes to that type of thing in New South Wales.
Yeah, I'm just talking about CDC in general for the dwellings that happens in New South Wales. So it's just one to maybe look into to reduce. And
we're happy to take
That sounds like another long number 28.
Thank you. That's also an answer for the community, not myself. So.
Yeah, thank you. We've got time for one more question. We've gone way over time, and then we'll stop for a break.
I just wanted to ask how to be a squeaky noise. How to be more squeaky, because I've been trying to get action in our
I thought I was
streets
being pretty loud.
for 8 years, and I've spoken to councillors, I've spoken to council, We get to the point, oh yeah, we're going to do something, and then it goes deathly silent.
What's the topic, sorry?
The topic is that our road drains through our garage. Instead of going through the drain, which has been
drainage?
completely
I think the whole
overrun
tonight's
for
about
20
drainage.
years. It's about drainage, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want my garage to be part of the Byron drainage system.
That's a fair point. There is a whole point in the recommendation that talks about a whole new drainage system. I don't think there's any easy or fast answer. I think that's the point. We're all frustrated. We've got time for one more question and then we'll go to a break. And it's got to be a minute.
We're speaking about raising houses and the like. What sort of houses are we talking about? Timber houses, brick houses? So I would understand you can only raise timber houses.
Yep. Can't raise mine, it's brick. Yep.
Yeah, nothing on the slab. I wouldn't have thought so.
Yep.
What percentage is timber houses?
Yeah, it's a case by case basis. Yep. There's a fair few timber houses around. I will just highlight that after we're going to a break in a minute, and Justine, Elliot, and Mark Swivel and Lyon will need to go now. So, does anybody have any questions for Justine, Michael, and Mark, because they will be going? They won't be here when we come back. So, if we can have just a very quick 1 or 2 1-minute questions, because they won't be here.
Justine, I would like to push on the Insurance Council of Australia. It's taking, why does an assessor and a hydrologist need 8 weeks to assess whether it was an inundation of water or a flood? And people's lives are held at ransom because these companies can't decide what it was. As I said earlier, any of those cases, please contact me. I've been advocating for individuals to the insurance company themselves, and there have been those incredibly lengthy delays for that, as well as the broader issues with insurance companies. So I'd absolutely encourage you to do that. I've also been making a lot of representations to the Insurance Council of Australia saying they need to get their act together in terms of how they deal with people on the claim. But again, for any of those individual cases, contact me and I'll take them all up.
Justine, that's a new norm, number 27. Would you be able to follow that up for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Justine. One more question directed to Michael or Mark Swivel, because they'll need to go, they won't be here. Just the lady at the back of the door. I'm keeping it to a minute because we're break.
You hear now?
If it's been a little bit louder.
A bit louder? Still can't hear myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. To Michael and Mark and anybody else really that is seemingly dealing with the flood, Shire Council flood study that I've been studying for since years and years and years and years and years. And I want to ask them, the 1972 Cyclone Daisy flood is not why it isn't on your significant, on council, significant flood events. And it is missing. There is May 1987, March 1974, June 2005, March 2017, a smaller event also occurred in January 2008. The 87 one is, okay, we're moving on. So where is Cyclone Daisy? Now that was when we lived in Hastings Road, and all of a sudden the water was carrying north, and we all wondered what on earth was happening. It was an inch to go into our house, and we finally followed the crowd and got to north of the soccer field, and what did we see? Massive rapids tearing out to sea, and it went for hours. And I tried to email councillors to do the same thing. I don't know how that happened, but I saw it.
So that's what we're doing tonight, is we're working on the solution.
No,
So we can't
I
do
asked
anything
them
else.
to, it's prevention, preventing. We're talking about everything tonight has been all what's happened. We need prevention. And this, I would like to know why that is not on the significant flood events. 1972, Stockholm
That's a significant.
We will, and we'll refer it to Council's Minister for Floods, Duncan Day, to make sure that the database is updated.
Sold. Okay, thank you. I know we've moved a bit slowly through that section, but there's quite a lot to get through. We're going to a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're talking about our favourite topics: outlets, dams. Outlets, rock walls. CV5. There's nothing that's more important than another, but I am going to jump ahead. I'm going to jump to NOM number 18, which is a government subsidy for Starlink. Justine did touch on it, but David Warth, who is running as an independent candidate, he is looking at it in communications in a lot of detail, and I just wanted to give him a chance to talk about it because he's helping us in that regard. So David, I'd like to join us. Thank you.
Hello everybody, and thanks very much for coming along. And I'd just like to acknowledge, is that better? You can hear it?
Yes.
Okay, I'd just like to acknowledge the regional people, past, present and emerging. And we've been looking at communications. That was one of the biggest problems that we had. It was appalling. Everything went out. And I know I lost my vehicle, and I had an excellent boat, which I could do rescues with, and I couldn't get anywhere. I had to end up talking with people, eventually got people to tow the boat, and then we ended up out at Corokai. Nobody had communications out there. People were stranded. You wouldn't know. You just had to go in the boat and go ashore and see if they're okay, or wave to them, or it was appalling, and that lasted for far too long. So I had a talk with Sharon Corvalida, the Ballina Mayor, and she actually arranged Starlink for their community, and she spoke very strongly with the regional manager for Telstra, and he jumped to it and came down and got the Starlink organised, which is great because we do need a really secure network of communications. This was appalling. This cost lives. I'm sure this cost lives. So I had a bit of a look into it. Starlink seems to be very good, but not perfect. I've been looking at people in Birdsville who have been using it, and they're talking about dropouts and the cost of installations around about $1,000 or so to get set up, and then the actual hardware seems to only be warranted for about a year, and it's not particularly robust. And then they're talking about the possibility of moisture in the troposphere affecting its ability to pass message and stuff like that. We have more than a bit of moisture in the troposphere. The troposphere is the air in the first 12 kilometres from Earth, and we have more than just a bit of moisture. We have deluges. So it seems like that's a pretty good thing, but again, we're relying on an outside organisation. And we found that to our detriment, that if we rely too much on outside organisations, that we often get let down. So there is a high-frequency radio network that the Flying Doctor uses, and a lot of people in the outback use, which is very, very powerful. it can bounce off the ionosphere and it can actually have a range of up to 3,000 kilometres. It's reasonably cheap. Can be set up with batteries and a generator on high ground and will be very, very reliable, really reliable. So you could have a network of those. So it's an alternative to Starlink, very, very reliable, and basically we do it ourselves. We're not relying on somebody else's satellites. So it's just an option to think about. But on a more practical basis, when I was out with my boat supplying people, all we needed was UHF radios. That's all that was needed. They're very cheap. You can get very powerful, well, they're short range, but they're quite powerful kits for about $600. And the battery life is 30 hours on those. And the kit is 2 of them, so you've got 60 hours of operation. And people stuck in their homes or stuck on farms can actually just call out. And we didn't have this. We lost everything. We lost our phones, we lost our internet. But a UHF radio would give you short-range communication with people coming to the rescue or your neighbours or just to see if everybody's all right. So it could be a very good backup, but I think we have to get proactive in this. I think we really have to, rather than relying on the government, and there's been a lot of talk about relying on the government and getting funding for this and funding for that, but we could have another event. We never know when this can happen. We could have another event and we still haven't got communication sorted. And that's a worry. That's a real worry. And for the sake of a few $100s, we could have short-range communication. And for the sake of a few $1,000s, these high-frequency radios could get out to, within a long, long range and just tell people what's going on, and we could actually get some help. Because we would have reliable communications. So we have the option of Starlink, which seems to be a good option to have it placed on places that certainly don't flood and places that could still operate and still have staff working. So that would be good. It's quite expensive. It's about $131 a month and about $1,000 to set up the hardware, and then we don't know. It doesn't really have that much of a track record in severe weather events. So
I think we've wanted government subsidy because of those costs.
oh yeah, so government subsidies, yeah, for sure. But I think we should look at the whole range. I think we should get practical, really practical. We never know when another event could happen. And even with those UHF radios, everybody where I went to help were all crying out for UHF radios. They're not expensive, and I think we also should look at the assets that we have, the people with four-wheel drives, the people with boats, and have a list of assets for each area. I think that would be a good practical thing to do, so as we know who to call on. This was really lacking. It was quite chaotic in the beginning, but it got very well organised very quickly. So now we have rapid response groups that are formed by themselves without any government help at all. So I think we could get practical and we could get going this very quickly, because if we wait and basically have another event, and if another event comes, we still haven't got communications.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking into government subsidies for communications that are not being kept on for our area. And Kimberley Hone is also looking at government subsidies for insurance. Kimberley. And we are running super behind, so just a couple of minutes, Kimberley. And I do have also a job. We had a microphone issue.
Okay, I'll go really fast.
So I wanted to talk to you about an insurance policy idea that
I'm running with personally. So yes, I'm running for the Nats, but this is something personally that I've taken on. And I met with Minister David Littleproud, who lives in northern Queensland, and he suggested this to me and Sharon, the Ballina Mayor, and so I've taken it and I'm running with that. I submitted this insurance idea in week 2 of the floods. So in week 1, I was stationed at the evacuation centre in Kingy, and I worked all day and all night there, and I could see very quickly that it was going to take a long time to rebuild with all the damage that we've had throughout the entire Northern Rivers region. So I know we're talking about Ocean Shores here today, but this policy will actually cover the entire Northern Rivers region. However, I would like to see a show of hands later if I'm on the right track and if it's something that you would like. Otherwise, I want to know if I'm barking up the wrong tree and I'm fighting for something that no one actually wants.
We definitely want insurance to be subsidised.
Okay, all right. So the way that it works is up in northern Queensland, where there's a few cyclone-prone areas around about Airlie Beach, the government will give residents who live there and small businesses 46% premium rebate for every payment that you make. So that's almost 50%. It's massive. So the government puts $10 billion annually into an account to cover this rebate. It's only for cyclone areas. And so what I'm doing now is I'm asking for this already existing policy to be extended to the Northern Rivers areas of major flooding zones. So I'll just break it down super quickly for you. If you want to know more, I've actually given a copy to Fran and she can maybe email that out even. Yeah, okay. What was that?
I think we might have run out of time.
Oh, already? Okay. Well, I'll put it in an email and Fran can get it out because there are a few little things that you might need to know before you say, yep, that's for me.
Thank you, Kimberley. Tomorrow, and Mandy, I know that I asked you to talk again about rental support, but can you do it in a minute?
Can I just, I can't be really fast, but I can say something on, can I just answer the thing on reinsurance, because it's actually really important.
Yeah, it's just the whole drainage issue, we haven't even started and we've got half an hour.
Oh, I don't want to drain the drainage issue.
No.
One of the things I just want to...
And hang on a second, I have to clip you.
Clip me up
yes,
again.
because we've lost the microphone on the camera.
Thanks for that.
So I'm going to get into
All right.
There we
You
go.
can clip me. It's really great. What Kimberley was talking about is a really great scheme. But what we've missed and what we have to do is tiers of government aren't working together, and we need to have bipartisan approach. There actually was. It's called there was an amendment. The Greens have put forward an amendment to the reinsurance it was the floods and cyclone and floods reinsurance that went. It was actually in the Senate. The same time as budget, I did a call out to ask our local member Justine and to Kevin Hogan to say, okay, here's our opportunity to work together. If everyone backs it and it gets through the Senate, by the next day when it went through the lower house, we would have all had government-backed insurance because the amendment was to include our region for floods. It didn't get backed. Now, you know how long it takes to get that work up there again? These are missed opportunities, and that's when we all have to work together. We have to have these conversations because that would have been changing. What went through was government-backed insurance for North Queensland, and we're up here up to our necks in water, and we missed out. Okay. That can't happen. Anyway, I think it's... I'll go. Anyway, I'm all here for housing.
Don't forget the lapel.
I'll go take the lapel off. We do need rental reform, and one thing all people across, I've met with all the mayors recently, everyone agrees that we need to have huge changes in our short-term holiday letting so we can actually claim back houses into our regions and our community for our long-term leases. So that's something we all need to get happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. We're severely out of time. and I'm juggling microphones and lapel mics. So now this is the hard part, everybody, that we've actually been waiting for all night. This is where we're talking about outlets and drains and dredging and rock walls and everything that the community is divided over. We will have a Q&A at the end, but we're severely behind. It's 9:04. So we still need to keep it constructive. When we get to the Q&A and looking forwards, we can't focus on the past. I don't think council or anybody's cracking out a bulldozer anytime soon. There has to be a solution study on every measure that is being proposed. As frustrating as that is, it is the process because there's a domino effect either upstream or downstream. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Rob's going to talk about CD. Are we up to CDM? Because I'm jumping around. Sorry, guys. I'm CDM. So I think you've just passed it, Huggy. CDM. I don't know how they come up with these codes. Catchment drainage model. We do have in our notices of motion about opening flood overflows, and Rob is going to talk about the drainage model. You'll have to express your presentation.
Yep, I will. Can you hear me okay?
You need a microphone.
Do I need this as well? Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yes, please. So I'm going to just put the set some context about flooding and why it's happening in the area. So I've done my background is working with spatial information. So there's a lot of data goes into this. We're blessed in this region to have some of the richest data sources in terms of historical photography and 3D models of anywhere in the state. So I'm going to try to take advantage of that. Principles of flood mitigation 101. We need to work with nature, not against it. So we need to understand where the water flows. It's pretty basic, really. And then we need to understand the cause of the flooding if we're going to come up with potential strategies to stop it. So let's look at Ballynudgel. This is Ballynudgel back in 1947. That's a pub. Everybody knows where that is. This is the creek. It flows, the floodwaters overtop this creek, flow down through underneath the railway bridge and down to join the creek further down or stay in the creek. Overflows would come down this area to the south of the pub, flow through a big swamp, and then the water would go back into the creek here. Now, Spencer Jones is in the audience. He was headmaster at the school from 1958 to 85. It never flooded into the school during that period. Let's switch to the current day. Massive changes. We've got a whole development here. Remember, this was where the water used to go. We've now got an industrial estate built there. The water no longer has the opportunity of flowing through here, getting retained here and going out there. Next one, please. If we look at the terrain model, so this is a thing called LiDAR, which penetrates through vegetation to give a detailed terrain model. The darker blue colours are lower in the landscape, and you can see the channels here. What has to happen now is the water overflows through here like it used to, fills a much smaller swamp here, has to go through this little drain through the railway, along behind the building, up through the edge next to Sanctum, under the road, down beside the freeway to join here. This is what that drain looks like today. That's the main drainage for Ballynudgel. So it's not rocket science to understand that Ballynudgel needs to improve that drainage channel to reduce flooding. Next, please. If we then go to Ocean Shores. Ocean Shores is well up in the landscape. Now, I'm not going to profess to know what's causing the flooding in Ocean Shores. I don't know enough about the area. I'm interested in learning, right? But it too is largely influenced by the ability of water to escape where it's accumulating through drains. So it's another area where I'm sure if we do an investigation will identify a whole bunch of pinch points where the water is being restricted, or where debris is clogging up the drainage channels that are there and restricting flows to back it up and cause flooding. And the comment that there's a house which gets flooded every rain event is, I would guess, in this area. But yeah. Next one, please. Now, South Golden Beach, New Brighton. I live in New Brighton. I've looked at it for a long time and heard the stories. There's a lot of talk about outflows. There's a lot of talk about what's happened and drainage. To really understand what happens at New Brighton, South Golden Beach, you've got to go back to 1947 and look at the drainage flows there. So this is the creek that comes down and comes to New Brighton there. You can see a mass of drainage channels, all draining to the ocean there. What happens is when this creek, you'll see that it's convoluted. When this creek is in flood, the water breaks through the banks here. And in 1947, it would have flowed over land through there or there to join up with channels and then join up with water coming down from the north at from Billy Nature Reserve and out through an outfall there. Those red lines are the current roads. So the position of this outfall was right in Helen Street. So that's why, the water is naturally trying to go to Helen Street. That's the pinch point, that's the basis of the flooding in this whole area. If we go to the next one. 1958, the South Golden Beach development started. The first thing they did was close that outflow. So there's some really interesting conspiracy theories about what was going on in South Golden Beach at the time. One of them was that this was an airstrip. I've got no idea why people needed an airstrip in Northern Rivers that wasn't controlled by air traffic. But you can see that at this point, that channel is now closed. So that's the root cause of our problem, is that we no longer had that outflow which got rid of the excess floodwaters from 1958. A channel was constructed in the hope that the water could come out and back or direct that water over there. But next, over time in the next few years, so this is 62, we had the hotel developed there, more development down here, but there's not a lot of development. The quarry was started here where the Venice Day Church is, and the canal was developed further. We'll go through. More development in the 1966. So you can see a progressive development. Filling started to occur from this quarry. They weren't quarrying for the fun of it. It was to fill these areas. And the canal is starting to take more shape. Keep going. 71, again, more of the same. But probably the point in 1971, there's a lot of talk about the outflow. It didn't exist at that time in 1971, so it's not a natural feature. Now, unfortunately, there's a big gap in air photos at this point. The next one's 1987, and you can see the outflow there, which was opened and had been closed in that time. But you can see that it's actually not connected at all to what was the major flow areas down here. This is where the creek was breaking its banks, and these were the outflows here. There are some remnant outflows there, but they were probably close with sand mining, and they were nowhere near as significant as the one that was at Helen Street. Next one. And in the 2000s, we're pretty well there, except we've got a levee bank has been developed along here. So now the water that does come out here can't actually even flood South Golden Beach, although we all know that it did. So, but what it means is that water is going into this area here and building up in this area here. The other thing is with the restrictions in drainage, restrictions in flow here, there's a lot of water coming down from the north, which is building up in this area here and is coming through the back of Fern Beach into South Golden Beach. So water's just trying to go where it used to be, basically, and we're trying to stop it. So we're already heavily down an engineering solution path now. Okay, next. All right, so looking at what can we do, or so yeah, this is again a terrain model underpinning the area. And you can see that water is most likely, if it's going to come into this area, once it gets to a certain level, is most likely coming through the back of the dunes there between Fern Beach and the dunes when it achieves a certain height. When it goes through there, it comes into Fern Beach. Now, one thing we've talked about, I cannot understand, what we're doing with those pumps is pumping water from here and putting it into here, which then goes up around here or around here. It doesn't make sense. So, there's some basic strategies that we should be following. Next, please. Okay. Now this is the area, concentrating on the area between New Brighton and South Golden Beach. So we've got water coming through here, overtopping the canal, the channel, New Brighton, the Marshalls Creek channel, and flowing into this area. It may have gone out here at some point, but it's not going out there, it's not going out there, and it can't get out over here. So what happens is it ponds up in this area, and when it gets to a certain height, 1.97 metres above AHD, it starts coming down here. And we have the flooding in New Brighton comes from the north. You'll see, if you go there after floods, you'll see that the debris is lined up, not coming out of the creek, but it's coming into the creek at this location. Now, you can imagine that if a channel up here can carry, if all the water that it can't carry is flowing out there, this channel is quite capable of carrying the amount of water that's left over in the creek channel after that water's all gone out. So if this was left by itself, there's every chance that New Brighton would not flood, because the channel here is about equivalent to up here, so it would probably work. However, when you add all this water back into it, we get flooded. And so I think we had damage to, was it over 100 houses in New Brighton? It's quite significant that, it...
Is that our resident geologist nodding?
Yeah.
You thought you could hide. You're busted. Rob, we're almost out of time.
Yep, okay. Finish. So if we're looking at reducing flood heights, I see that we've got three options. One is to pass it on downstream, and we do that by improving and maintaining drainage channels. That's the solutions that we can use up higher in the catchments. The second one is we can retain it safely and pass it on at a rate that doesn't impact downstream. So that's common where you have these detention ponds, where you basically hold the water back, store it, and then have leaky dams basically that then feed the water back into the system at a rate that the system can handle it. There's not a lot of options there. There are some, but we can talk about that later. The other one is to take it off the floodplain, and I don't want to get into arguments about outflows versus channels versus pumps. So let's just say we're going to do that with Magic Sky pumps powered by rainbows, okay? That's the Northern Rivers solution. So there's been a history of hydrological modelling to look at different options. And, so in the last model, previous models, they've looked at drainage. The last models, we got them to look at an outflow between South Golden Beach and New Brighton. as part of my day job, I run a research and development program which includes modelling. My job is about asking the right questions, and I think that's what we've got to do now, right? We've got to ask the questions of the modellers, because what's happened in the past is when they do a hydrological model, they'll model it with a certain outflow of a certain size and height, and then come back and say that didn't work. And they reject the whole option of getting rid of the water at that point because that particular run of the model didn't work. So where we've got to work towards is making sure that any simulations and modelling is aimed at answering the right questions, not at answering a question that the hydrologist has come up with. Yes, please. Okay, so the process I believe we've got to look at is we've got to try to understand what will happen under certain scenarios, under a certain strategy, what will happen to the flood flows, regardless of how we achieve that. So separate whether it's an outflow, whether it's a pump, whether it's an under-dune drainage system. Let's look at what happens if we take 10, 20, 50, 100 megalitres a minute out of a system at a specific location and see what happens to the flood level. If we then go on and look at what will certain levels of reduction in the flood levels have on the community. So how many houses will be saved if we reduce floods by 0.5 metre? How many, what's the social impact, what's the cost? Thirdly, once we've identified appropriate solutions or strategies, we look at engineering options to discuss how we can achieve those outcomes. So, and at what cost. And once we've got costs for these, costs of damage, costs of achieving those reductions in flood heights, we can actually do a return on investment analysis and go to government saying, if you spend, it doesn't matter if we've got to spend $20 million on flood pumps, for example, if it will save the community $100 million, then it's a good return on investment for government. So we've got to, I believe we've got to propose to the government with a business case of what they can save and somehow quantify social costs as well. So in terms of strategies, 3 areas that I know we'll call flooding are high up in the catchments. I think drainage and maintenance of channels and drainage control and possibly storage strategies will actually help in these areas. And then there's a bunch of areas here where getting water off the floodplain will actually achieve what we need to achieve. So, thank you.
Could you, in 1 minute or less, just make a comment about the rock wall at Brunswick Heads, because we have a question about that.
Okay, could you flip to, I just happen to have this prepared. Another 2. Okay, there's a lot of talk about rock walls and drainage. Keep going. Next one. Yep, this one. Intuitively, and I thought the same thing, intuitively, if you want to get more water out, you dredge a channel and make it bigger, right? The problem is that we are on a tidal creek. The baseline of the water, the amount of channel that we've got available to flow is not the base of the creek, it's actually low tide line. We can't get water flowing out below low tide. So if we were to increase our channel capacity where the bottom isn't exposed at low tide, we actually get nothing, no additional gain. Now rock walls are different because they actually extend up above high tide level, but the dredging itself, and next one please. The dredging itself, now a lot of the creek has got areas of sandbank exposed at low tide. But when you actually look at how much that impacts upon flow, it's only in at low tide that we actually gain anything. And at high tide, we actually gain nothing. And the flood that happened in 2022, in February, was actually at a 1.8 metre tide. It was probably had a storm surge, so we were probably looking at a sea level of well over 2 metres. And if you then take into account the amount of water that would have been coming down Brunswick River, we were probably looking at a base level of well over 2 metres, like 2 or 3 metres. And it's only the water, the amount of capacity above that level that will affect how fast the water will flow out. So we've got to be objective about the solutions that we push for, because
the rock walls, that's explaining the dredging, but the rock wall of Readings Bay that goes from Christmas Beach, that side.
Again, that Readings Wall is covered at mid-tide, so I don't think Readings Wall will affect flood outflows. I'm not so sure about the main one on the channel, but when you look back at the photos, 47, 58 and that, the channel was, that area, Readings Bay was always sandy. It had channels going through it. They've shifted, but I'm not sure it's going to be the panacea that we all think it should be. It could help, yeah.
Rob, can you say hooked up to the mic? Let's throw to questions, and we're doing this in 1 minute sprints now. Who'd like to ask a question of Rob or Ziwar?
Yes, please. My question is about the climate.
Just bring the microphone.
My question is about the climate. So there's so much energy in the atmosphere. Will our flood mitigation strategies actually stop the massive flooding that will occur from tropical low depressions that have that extra energy, so that our mitigation won't work because of the amount of rainfall that we are going to get in future years?
Climate change is real. Things are happening, but the patterning is more about things that we think are extreme now will happen more frequently. And so what we've just had is not going to be something that we hope we won't experience again in our lifetimes. It's probably going to be happening several times in our lifetime. And we've just got to shift our expectations to that. The climate, the latest flood modelling report actually included it was using scenarios with expected changes. And the expected changes are more intensive rainfall, higher sea levels, so we've got a higher base level. But the strategies will still, we will have less severe floods as well. We'll still get a distribution, it will just be shifted and more frequent. So, flood mitigation strategies will still work, but we've just got to be prepared to deal with the more extreme events.
I don't have a question just right now, but I'd like to thank you for the way you described this, because I think you've described how the natural flows used to happen and how we interfered with that with our development and how we changed the natural flows. And that's sometimes what's happening now. We're getting our flood effects by what we changed.
That's right.
I think it's a bit of a shame that we don't necessarily have all the councillors and potential people who might make a difference still in the room with us, because I think this is really important what you're pointing out, that we need to have these strategies based on what you're describing from a scientific perspective and what we could perhaps reverse from what we changed to make a difference in the future.
That's why we have Robyn and Steve. I still want Ziwar and Robyn to say a few things. And we've got, like I said, geologists and hydrologists that are inside the conversation with us. And so I guess the point of tonight is to show everybody that we do have some fantastic experts that are helping to guide the community. There's no quick fix. Does anybody want to ask Rob any more questions while he's on still tied up clipped up to the mic? We will get kicked out of here was meant to be 9:30. Let's not tell Dino that it's 9:29. So, but we probably only have time for 2 more questions. We've actually already heard from you. Can we give someone else a chance? Sorry.
I know you've already heard me also.
Yeah, sorry. Can we go to someone new? I'm sorry. I'm going to have to. There's other people that want to have something to say as well. Sorry, guys. Just trying to be fair.
Is there precedence anywhere else in Australia where we've reopened to the ocean? Are there communities where it's happened at all?
I don't know any, no.
I believe there's one in Manly. He knows. I was talking to someone recently.
Down that shop, in the research class, and also Byron Gates at
When I was a kid, so this is the 1980s in the Central Coast north of New South Wales, this would happen quite frequently, and the council brought the bulldozers out every time it rained and opened the ocean outfalls up to let them go so the houses didn't flood.
How do they council do it?
Yeah, I think we use this opportunity to put pressure on them to do exactly that. Yeah.
Spoken before.
I did.
And thank you. We have one more question for Rob, and then some words from Ziwar and Robyn.
I just wanted to quickly comment on that solution just now, is that if we were to open it up in the more recent than as Rob earlier
You need
mentioned,
to be clipped up as well.
The tides from the ocean would have flown into the suburbs, so in some instances it would work.
So, sorry, we've got the guys that have a deep knowledge in modelling and science who.
Can they nominate what the height differences are, please?
Sorry, can we get the microphone? Who's on the microphone? Just hang on a second. We'll come to you in a
I
second.
put this question to Michael Lyon before he left.
Can you speak a bit louder? We can't hear you.
I put this question to Michael Lyon before he left, and he said the hydrologic modelling suggested, and I agree with one of your comments during your presentation. Thank you very much for that. It depends on how you ask the hydrologist what answer you'll get. Like briefing a lawyer, is what outcome you want. And I believe there's an amount of that because he can't get any funding unless he can prove it will take the water out. So unless we can prove it will take the water out, he can get no funding for it. That's his only answer. Correct.
That's correct, and that's how it's listed in their reporting. And
I think we need to get the questions asked correctly about the flood events that we will be having, not on previous data.
Let's get the bulldozer down this week then.
I think that's not the way the process works. That's it.
Who's got a bulldozer here?
I've got a photo
On the point, so there's not a lot of difference between the height between the swales and the high tide mark. Particularly if there's a storm surge coming, your high tide is probably going to be anything up to 2 or 3 metres higher than what it normally, even your high tide, happens. The problem with opening up an outfall, which hasn't got a strong freshwater component keeping the salt water out, is the potential for waves to come through and bring salt water into the environment. So we need to be cautious that we don't actually create a problem because we've got storm surges coming through the hole in the dunes, which and Dune Care has spent a lot of time creating in the first place to protect the houses. So we're concentrating on flooding here, but we are equally at threat from ocean storm surges and fire as well. But
Hydraulic paint on a spillway, that's all you need.
I actually agree with that one, but that's why I'm trying to say that the steps we need to do is to establish that if we were to take out this much water from this point, we can reduce flooding. And once we get that tick, then we can start talking about engineering solutions that we can achieve that. Now, I know for at Covey Station, for example, which, you know, is a big irrigator, when they turn on their pumps, they can reverse the flow of the Darling River. So when you talk about the capacity of flood pumps to be able to get rid of water, we're just talking about how big do you want, okay? So don't discount, but flood pumps have got a problem that they're unreliable if they put the wiring at the bottom of the tank and don't have power. So, you know, but let's do this stepwise. Let's establish that we can find a solution by getting rid of the water, and then we can start discussing options. And I agree with you, an outlet under the
Can
gym.
I just say of a very simple method? As an ex-farmer with dams, and every dam had to have a spillway on it. So when there was a downpour, and they were all spring-fed dams, then the water would naturally go over, down around the spillway. Very simple, and reverse the situation with having a hydraulic gate on it so that when the ocean's coming in, you can close it off.
Yeah.
I think there's potential in that. Yes, I do agree.
We have a question from Geologist. David Petrel says, what if you dredge wider instead of deeper? And storm surges are not 2 to 3 metres higher than normal high tide levels. What if you dredge wider instead of deeper?
I will disagree with you about that on 2 or 3 deeps.
That's a different question. That's Daryl. David Petrel, what if you dredge wider instead of deeper?
Again, an engineering question that I'm not going to answer from the floor. I'm not a civil engineer. I want to separate the questions and leave it to the experts that are the hydraulic. That's a hydraulic engineering question. My biggest problem with outfalls is potential for the tide to come in.
I think the biggest point that we're trying to make tonight, guys, is Council has commissioned this report, which is the white, I keep referring to as the white folder. It's being updated. Council will have their own independent experts. We in community have assembled our own experts, so we're going to keep Council in check. We're going to keep the independent reviewers, report writers in check. So we're lucky to have guys like Robyn and Ziwar and the other experts that we have. So we're not in charge of the money, we're not in charge of the implementation, but we want to make sure that we keep asking the right questions. Is that right, Rob? Asking the right questions and making sure that all of the ideas that you guys throw up are put to a solution study to make sure that every idea is explored. So when it comes to the time of the white folder being reviewed and furthered, we will be coming back to everybody and asking for further input at that stage. We can't cover everything in one night. So we will be getting onto solutions that everybody wants to be investigated. So that's for another time. We're terribly out of time. Ziwar, did you want to say anything? Because we've sort of... but you'll need to click because...
I think just quickly we need to consider all options, and yes, they've determined that the outflow is not an option. They didn't model that with the hydraulic gate. So we need to look at the solutions that council has rejected and relook at them, because they've come forward with 24 recommendations, but they assessed and explored maybe 40 or 50, I can't tell you exactly how many, but they've discounted them very quickly because they gave us reduction in flooding between 10 centimetres and 50 centimetres. But if we can have 4 or 5 reductions in 10 to 50 centimetres, that could save 20% of houses, and that's a great outcome. So we need to revisit what they've produced, and we need to scrutinise in detail and ask the right questions so that they don't get discounted overnight and not explored further. So we would love to hear from the community like yourself. The non-return valve needs to be considered. It's the first thing I said to Francesca when she said, can we do outlets? I said, if you pair it with a non-return valve, sure. But other than that,
So
you're going
a
to...
non-return valve is...
A hydraulic gate, something that stops the ocean coming in the times where...
So it lets the water out at low tide and then closes, doesn't
and it's either on a smart system or manually controlled, lifted, raised.
Maybe I should do some drawings for you. Exactly.
You can do the drawings for us.
So the reason why we have Ziwar on the community team is because he is involved with implementation of flood measures in his projects in Sydney. He lives up here, but he works in Sydney. So Ziwar knows all about tanks and holding, how to get DAs through as complying development rather than a full-blown DA. That was a good suggestion. Robyn, we've ended up skipping all of your topics because we've raced through. Is there anything that you would like to say so that you're not?
Well, I'd actually really like.
Hang on, let me come over to you with the clip-on mic. The clip-on. Just because it's not working on the camera.
Okay.
So that's you.
That's it? Okay. I think it's very clear that we need to ask the right questions of the consultants that have been appointed by council. And with that in mind, I'd like to nominate Rob Crosley to be our representative. We don't have a representative on the current flood committee, and I think he's a perfect person to represent us and ask the right questions. That's all I have to say.
I'm not sure whether I should be thanking you or not, but yeah.
Yeah, but you.
So in terms of the flood committee, there's a couple of spots coming up, and Ziwar and I and Rob will all be hoping to be on the flood committee because we bring different skills. I need my glasses for the next bit. So I don't think we have time for any more questions. Let me just find myself here. Just a quick note on the South Golden Beach pumps. There is a section, a recommendation in the white folder saying that the levy needs an audit. We need more than a bloody levy audit. We need to find out why the South Golden Beach pumps are upside down, why the electrics are at the bottom getting wet, why there's no way to remotely or automatically turn the pump on. And we also need to turn the pump around so that it's pumping water into the ocean and not back into the creek, which then floods the streets again. So
why there's not a non-electric power supply.
Exactly. We've got to the end of the technical part. I just wanted to reiterate what Rob and Ziwar and Robyn have said is we've rewritten history with the way that we've put in roads and houses. The 2020 report is a good basis, but it needs to be recalibrated with 2022 data. The implications for us as community is that we can't ever stop the rain, but we can mitigate the impact on flooding, and that's the $1 trillion question. The next version of this report will identify measures that can be implemented to minimise the impact on us. And our job as the steering committee is to make sure that the solution studies are focused, that they include community input. So this is not the last time that we'll be meeting. And we'll be overlooking to make sure that the outcomes that are delivered create safety for all of us. And we will certainly be advocating to save houses by elevating them and waterproofing them rather than losing them. So we're out of time. I wanted to just say a couple of action points. If anybody hasn't registered on the QR code, if you could please do that to make sure we have your email address to send you links. Flood stories are due by tomorrow. Council water levels and photos, you can still send those in. You can still send us feedback on the notice of motions, Also, North Byron Business Chamber is also working on a master plan, and the master plan, if we can develop a master plan for North Byron, it will also attract funding, and that will help us with drainage funding. So if you could also support the North Byron Chamber, because they are championing the master plan, that will help us with drainage. Council, we've given them a fair few actions already. So I'd like just to say thank you to Justine, Elliot, Mal, Lanyon, Kimberley, Hone, Sebastian, Sciano, David, Warth, Mandy, Nolan, Michael, Lyon, Sarah and Jai, Councillor Hunter, Councillor Pugh, Councillor Swivel, Councillor Bolden, our community for showing up, Jan and Jim Mangelson, Ziwar, Sattouf, Rob Crosley, Robyn Bolden, Mark Russell, Will Jones, Robert Llewellyn on the camera, thanks for coming again, Lee Kerwin, Rachel Doyle, Ocean Shores Country Club, Brunswick Print Rescue, who've done everything at cost for us, Bintu Burns on the door, thank you, Fiona Knock, Sue and Peter Quinn, Alec Analda, Jeannie Nove, Heather Rowland, Nurit and Hagi Kopolovich Haddad, Heidi and David Purdy, Doron Milner, Nina Akabani, Mark Grant, Ian Wills, Caroline Parker, Jason Lee Lasky and the SES. Thank you, everybody. My final words are let's stay positive. We're definitely making progress. From little things, big things have grown. And let's keep going, let's keep showing up, and let's make sure that what is implemented out of the white folder is actually what we want. And thanks everyone who's donated so far. It's allowed us to cover the cost of Rob and editing, which is important for our films to end up in Parliament. So please keep the donations coming, big or small, is hugely appreciated. Thank you, that's it.